Good evening. So tonight I was planning to take you on this wonderful journey of what everyone does and how everyone builds their code and their node applications and the problems which they encounter. The problem is, as I was building up my slides and my examples, I kind of found that it was more to do with my battle scars and the issues which I faced building my node applications more than anyone else. So that's what I'm going to start with. We're lucky it's only a 20-minute talk, because it could quickly and easily turn into my life, my story, my anti-pattern. Thankfully, I don't have a publisher yet, so we're good to go. But, just be aware. So who am I? Well, I started off as a software tester, and I've now moved into a software freelancer, working at different parts of the stack. And I've had the wonderful advantage of working at some amazing companies, including our beautiful hosts, Seven Digital. You just can't get stuff. Technically, this is recruitment. The floor's coming up. It's a good sign. That was just being a short interlude, because me talking won't make much sense without my slides to back me up. Hopefully. So what we're going to talk about. So as I said, this is my pain points and these are my kind of issues which I've faced. So I'm going to start off with modules and then kind of down to the project structure, async obviously, and then error handling or lack thereof. Disclaimer. We are talking about anti-patterns, so obviously this is my version and what I think. JavaScript is a very subjective language, everyone has their own opinions. I'm not saying you're right or you're wrong, I'm just saying this is alternative, blah, 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 blah. The most important thing is it works, and that it's functional working code. But for me, there's one more example. And I like to be able to delete my code completely. And as was nicely pointed out earlier, Seven Digital have done that on my behalf from my old code base. Anyway, to here. But I like to be able to delete my code. And it's one of the beautiful things about Node, is that you have all of these short, small little modules floated around that you can pick and choose. And if something doesn't work the way you like, you just delete it and you start again. The problem which I found and what I'm going to talk into is that once this code starts to become more coupled, more integrated, less easy to work with, you generally just end up having a bad time. And you know what, I'm a good guy. I like my team to have a good time, some fun. And if they want to be able to delete all of my code when I've left, then I would like them to be able to do that. Tom, Luke, just a heads up, you may have to do this. So, moving quickly on, Node and NPM. So this one happened to me last week. So, obviously in my package JSON, I had a lovely little hat and said, I will take in AngularJS 1.2. Any minor revisions I'm going to take, because we all know semantic versioning, a minor revision will not break backwards compatibility. It's always pushed forwards and it will always work. Yay! Angular 1.2 worked happily, returning my document as expected. Angular 1.3, undefined, is not a function. So this kind of wasted a good 3 hours of my life trying to figure out why it worked on my machine, because obviously I had a version 1.2 NPM package, And why it didn't work in production, obviously, which did a fresh, nice, clean npm install. Always good. So, lesson 1 from my anti-patterns. Lock down your dependencies. Make sure that you know what you're working with. A really nice way to do this is with string wrap. This will produce a very similar looking file to a package JSON, but with all of your well-defined versions of every single package in your local directory. What it means is that you can commit it, and you can be guaranteed that when you do an npm install on someone else, or somewhere else, or another server, it will be exactly the same version, no matter what new revisions happened. Sadly, on GitHub, we've got 6 million package JSON files and only 25,000 string wraps. So it doesn't seem to be working as well as I expected. Generally, the most pattern I see is people just hard coding their dependencies. And this works. At least you get repeatable builds and you're not going to break in some random weird fashion when you're in the middle of a panic and trying to release new future bug fixes. But you do have a problem of how do you know when new updates are happening? How do you know that they're available? Again, nice little command called npm.updated. So it'll take what's in your npm package and then show you what is available, which is really nice when you're talking about major releases as well. Because you may be taking your minor releases frequently, but major releases don't get pulled in. And so you can frequently forget that they're actually available. For example, Groundify. We're happily sitting on the latest version, but there's a version 6 release, which we just haven't taken in yet, probably because we weren't aware. So a really nice command that you can run and just make sure you're up to date and pull in these dependencies when you would like them. So let's say that we've got this nice, happy, with guaranteed what our dependencies will be. We then do npm install. And sometimes it just feels a little bit like you're downloading the entire internet. And especially in production when you're going, is this even going to work? It's like, I'd like to be able to roll back quickly. And so like this additional time is not helping, especially if you've got things like Phantom.js. Like, it just takes a little bit of time, and it's that progress bar and another progress bar. It's a nightmare. Running npm production means that you don't install all your dev dependencies. It's beautiful, it's wonderful. I just keep forgetting to actually include that tagline. But this means that you don't download your dev dependencies and you only download what's required to run your application. Amazing. So we've now got this beautiful working application, we know what's installed, and it's really quick. So now let's look at the project structure, or at least some of my previous project structures. And unlike other languages, for example Go, Node doesn't actually define how you should structure your project. It doesn't give you, it's very flexible, so you can do whatever you want. Even if that means having a root folder which has got lots of folders, followed by lots of files, followed by a few more files. And it's not until you actually stop and look at it and go, oh my god, everything's really easy to find, because it's all at the root, but oh my god, I have got no idea which part of the system relates to which file and what is actually happening in my code base. Somewhat problematic when you like to delete code, because you can't, and you end up with something looking like this. Woohoo! So I've now got more strict about myself, more strict about how I'm approaching my project structures. So libs folder, just to self-contain everything, just to give it some formalization. And then start doing context. Like where context is the set of tasks working in. Then every file is its own isolated individual task. Did one thing only. Everything's named clearly, everything's set out, easy to read, easy to see, no massive stress. A lot of those files would have contained 10, 15 exports of different functions performing different tasks. Again, the coupling and the cohesion and the load you need to keep all of that in your head is just insane. By having it in this structure, at least you can look down it and say, oh look, that's where the code will probably be. If you're doing that and everything's a single file, then you can start releasing other npm packages. And you can start reusing them and taking advantage and sharing and making the whole community look better, which is the whole point of why npm is so amazing in the first place. Because people are releasing these reusable, functional aspects of the code. So now my project looks a little bit more like this. And as you can see in my lib folder, I've got some authentication, Elasticsearch, but it's a little bit more structured. I can actually see what's happening. I can see things like my app star and my Docker file and they're not lost in a clutter of JSON, wonderful JavaScript objects. So moving on, we've now got kind of like a sensible project structure going on, but let's look at async. And async is a controversial subject, and everyone loves and has got an opinion in the Null Void, which is great. Promises is an interesting one for me. I'm not a great big fan because, like, you still have callbacks. They're not really removing callbacks. I mean, examples of code like this, there's a layer of abstraction which I don't really need. For example, it's saying get tweet for, and then halfway down it's doing a HTTP get. So what is that? What's going on in that get tweet function? Because that's not very sensible, and I need to learn more. I need to go into code, and I need to read more. And for me, I don't like reading, so this just doesn't work for me. It's also really not part of the core node. One of the really things which I liked early on in the early days was that you could drop in any piece of code and you didn't really have to know the signature, because it'd return an error and it'd return a data object, and you know that the error would contain the error, and if it didn't, there'd be data. And that was very consistent, and so you could drop in code, move stuff around, and it wouldn't break so easily. And Prometheus seems to have gone against that, which is one of the things which I love. So that's my personal point of view. And what? I just stay away. So then we go down to callbacks. And callbacks is so amazing, it's got its own website. But, to be fair, for the right reasons. And this is my code which I did to parse GitHub, and I am very, very sorry. It's like, it makes sense, it's serial, because we've got some nice checking to make sure we're done in a for each statement, and then we do some more calls, and we do it again, and then finally at the bottom just here we do a callback. Hey! This is kind of why it's a problem, and this is why callbacks get bad reputation. Not because it's callbacks, but because you can do this. This is a developer-led issue, my issue, not the way it should be. So after some refactoring, you can kind of get it looking something more like this, where you've got a series of commands, but each one does its own thing, and you can actually read what it's doing. You can see what it's parsing, what it's responsible for, and if you want to add, remove new bits, then it's straightforward. Just add it in. And then, kind of like my new sign-up process looks more like this. We're saying it's a waterfall, because it is, and we're being clear about that. And we're saying, look, we're doing a check for something, if it doesn't exist, it's going to create, then we're going to log in, and then we're going to redirect. It's just a little bit more declarative, and you can read it from the outset without having to worry what's going on too much in the internals. And for me, this is kind of what I'm enjoying more than this, and especially this. Frequently, in my old days of writing node code, and I still see it today, dotted around the various forums and Stack Overflow, is maintaining your own state and your own callbacks. And it's like, how many callbacks do I need before I'm actually ready to call back? And then, okay, great, callback straight away. No, let's loop around and let's just see how many we're doing. Are we doing yet? Yep, okay, callback. If we're not, keep going. And then, like, it happens. People do this. And I did it for lots. The problem is there is no error handling. And so frequently I'd deadlock my system because I wouldn't call back, and then the system would just wait and it would get confused because it was expecting an extra one, and oh my god, it was a pain in the ass. Using async and map, again, it reduces your complexity because you don't have to manage counts anymore, and you actually add some more description because you can tell for every file count bytes. You're actually extracting and making it more readable and making it a little bit clearer about what's actually happening. So this is now my new pattern of dealing with callbacks. But there are another pattern coming. So in Node 11 and what will become Node 12, we've got generators. And generators introduce a nice new keyword called yield. By the way, yield, thank you for the beers. That's much appreciated. And so we started to get, we still keep that asynchronous nature, but our code reads in a more synchronous way. And so hopefully this will bridge the gap between the both worlds. Now I personally haven't played too much with this. I'm intrigued, I'm looking forward to it, it's coming. We'll see if this is another promises, or whether this actually is an interesting programming paradigm which we'll run with as a community. Error handling. Interesting. So error handling wasn't really great in my personal opinion from the start with Node, and we've introduced things like domains which have added more support, but I still find it problematic personally. I may be doing it completely wrong, and if I am, please tell me, because my applications keep crashing, apart from my current project. But it's still a problem. And it's things like, coming from a C# background, it's like try catch, like, yay! But no, because they will only catch things in the first context, and so when you do throw an error inside, you'll get a runtime error, and everything will blow up. But that's okay, because we can catch all. And it will never crash. And it'll be amazing. Maybe not. And also, don't have emails on import, especially when your CEO is on that list and you're running a load test. Because he may not use the boss for a few hours. So then we start returning errors, and like we deal with them in a more sensible, we actually manage our errors, which is wonderful. But we start returning strings everywhere. And it's like, okay, that's fine, at least you're returning something, but it's hard to know whether this error is because the database completely died, or because I was just giving some error back to the user, back to the UI or the consumer. So, it's nicer just to use the error object, just inherit from it, give it a proper name, give it something with some meaning, still got the same message, but in our code now, we don't have the implementation code because I deleted it, but we can actually throw that instead. And so we can then check for that, and we can check whether the error is something we care about, or whether it's actually a more serious problem, which we need to escalate, log differently, do something actually with, and like before. And if it's a string, you can't really do that unless you check with strings, and I've tried that and it didn't really work. Again, future, zones are coming. So I'm not massively familiar with this, but I'm going to give it a go. So if I understand correctly, Dart as a language had zones and had that as an error handling way, and then Angular, which is developed by Google, which is also developed in Dart, thought, oh, that's a great idea, we'll take that. And so now in Angular version 2, we'll have zones which do all the error handling, and it can actually track back what the user did in order to raise the exception on the client side. From what I understand, people like Strongly and a few others are doing it on the server side. And so we'll end up with code which will wrap code around zone.create, and then that will handle the errors for us, if my understanding is correct. And so from a consumer point of view, we still get the error data pattern, which will have the stack trace, or a zone trace in this example, but it will capture all the errors for us. And it even hook into things like the error event emitted from a HTTP, and so you don't have to deal and handle with that manually. It will just happen in the covers, which is an interesting proposition again. So it'll be interesting to see if that helps us improve and mitigate some of these answer patterns. Join entrance also, based on some example which I read online, you can wrap in a try-catch, and it will behave in a more sensible try-catch-like way, which will be interesting, because then maybe that will change the way, and maybe I won't have to deal with error handling, because the language and the infrastructure will support them. So that is an interesting future look. So once you've got all of these errors, you need to log them. And yes, I used to log them to the Heroku event log, and that was somewhat difficult to debug, especially on a production system. So things like Logstash is absolutely amazing. You can actually make sense of your logs and monitor journeys and see what the user did in order to end up at the exception. And you can do this over multiple days. And it's beautiful. And I'm actually pretty impressed with what those guys have done. So this makes error handling easy, because it makes it easy to debug as an after effect if the error does occur. But finally, with that in mind, Node is pretty amazing. As a language and as a runtime or a framework or whatever you want to describe it as, it is beautiful. A little bit too beautiful because it lets us get away with quite a lot of stuff. And as such, we'll get these things like callbacks nested within callbacks, nested within callbacks. It's not a problem as long as you're aware of it. So I always keep these things and these patterns which I have on this slide deck in mind, in the front of my head, and also in my subconscious. So when I'm writing Node, I don't have to keep kind of going, oh, sorry, I shouldn't do that. It's just more of a mindset. And that just comes with training, comes with doing code carters, and just writing more Node code. And that's all.